Ever notice how when you're running late, it's like always the traffic's fault?
Oh, yeah.
Never mind that you maybe hit snooze 3 times or something.
Right.
It's those other cars, man. They're out to get you.
They're all in on it together.
Sure.
And those other cars, they planned it.
Totally. It's a conspiracy.
Classic psychological projection, right? Like it's this almost automatic thing we do where we just see our own stuff in other people.
That's so true.
Yeah.
And today we are diving deep into that.
Yes.
That whole fascinating kind of human weirdness thing.
It's a big one.
It is. We're going to unpack what projection is, why it's so often tied to this low self-esteem thing, and most importantly, what we can do about it.
Yes, because who wants to be stuck blaming the traffic forever?
Right, exactly.
There's got to be a better way.
So let's break this down. Our source material defines psychological projection as, I'm quoting here, attributing one's own feelings to others.
Oh.
Basically, instead of owning up to what we're feeling, we just
slap a label on it.
yeah, slap it right onto somebody else.
Let's pass it right on over there.
Exactly.
Like accusing your partner of being jealous, when deep down you're actually the one riddled with insecurity.
Oh, that's good. Classic.
Yeah.
So it's a defense mechanism.
It is.
It's a way to just avoid those uncomfortable emotions about ourselves.
Right.
Which, okay, that makes sense on the surface.
Yeah.
But it seems like that would cause more problems than it solves.
It can.
Wouldn't it be better to just
Deal with it head on.
yeah, deal with the icky feelings, right?
You would think so, right? But our sources point out when your self-esteem is already low-facing, those negative emotions can feel like a huge threat.
Yeah,
It can feel like a really big deal.
totally.
So in those moments, it feels easier to project them outward.
Sure.
It's almost like our minds are trying to protect us from more damage,
Right.
even if that protection is kind of messed up.
So instead of just acknowledging hey, I'm feeling a little insecure right now,
Yeah.
we just start seeing it
Everywhere.
everywhere else.
Exactly. And our source had this great example
Okay.
about having a bad hair day.
Oh, yeah.
You ever have those
Loop has it?
where you're feeling self-conscious about your hair and then suddenly everyone else's hair just looks terrible?
Right. Yes.
It's not them. It's you. It's totally your own insecurity just projected out.
Ouch. Yeah, I felt that one.
Yeah.
I've been guilty of that for sure.
It's like our brains are trying to even the playing field by bringing everyone down to our level,
Right.
which doesn't really work.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah, it really doesn't.
It kind of makes it worse, usually, right?
Yeah, you're avoiding discomfort, but you're probably creating more of it for yourself.
Exactly. So we're avoiding discomfort in one area, but we might be accidentally creating even more discomfort somewhere else.
Which kind of defeats the purpose.
Right. And that's why I think just understanding projection, that's really the first step towards breaking that cycle.
Right. Understanding it in ourselves, and then maybe we can start to see it in other people.
Okay, so we've kind of established that this whole projection thing, it's often fueled by low self-esteem. There's knee-jerk reaction to protect ourselves from more icky feelings.
Right.
But how do we actually catch ourselves in the act?
Yeah, how do you know when it's happening?
Right.
Because it's usually not conscious, is it?
No, it's sneaky.
Yeah.
The sources we're looking at today, they point to self-awareness as the first line of defense.
Yeah, for sure.
Being more aware in general.
Absolutely. Becoming aware of what you're thinking, what you're doing. Those are so crucial.
So how do we get more of that?
Well, one of the things they talk about is journaling.
Okay.
Which can be a really powerful tool for self-reflection.
Journaling, okay, so brain dump all the things, right?
Kind of, but it's not just about venting. Although, that can be therapeutic on its own.
Right.
But it's more about taking the time to ask yourself those probing questions. Did I totally overreact to that thing my coworker said today?
Oh, yeah.
And then, what was I feeling right before that happened?
Ooh.
Because our sources emphasize that by actually writing it down, you start to see those patterns emerge.
Interesting.
And it's oh, this is happening again.
So it's not just what happened, it's the why.
Exactly. It's uncovering the why behind your reaction, not just the reaction itself.
Interesting.
And the sources even suggest using specific journal prompts to really dig into those projections.
Like what?
When do I feel most critical of other people, or what are my biggest insecurity triggers?
Yeah.
Things like that.
That's interesting, because if we can figure out what our triggers are, then maybe we can see it coming.
Exactly. You can almost predict when you're most likely to project.
Right.
And then maybe you can make a different choice in that moment.
Right, because you're not just reacting blindly.
It's true. Awareness gives you that tiny bit of space between what you're feeling and what you do.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And speaking of creating space, our sources also highlight mindfulness meditation as a super valuable tool.
Okay, see, now that always feels a little counterintuitive to me,
Really?
especially for someone who overthinks everything.
Yeah.
Isn't that just going to make all the thoughts louder?
I hear that a lot, actually, but mindfulness meditation, it's not about like stopping your thoughts completely.
Okay.
It's about noticing them without judgment.
So just letting them kind of,
Let them float on by. Like those critical thoughts, they're going to show up,
oh, they'll be there.
you know, because that's what our minds do, right? But instead of getting all caught up in them,
Yeah.
you just acknowledge them and let them pass.
So it's more about becoming like a compassionate observer
Yes, exactly.
of your own mind
Of your own thoughts and feelings.
rather than trying to shut the whole system down.
Yeah, because that never works, does it?
Never works.
It's like trying to hold a beach ball underwater.
Right. It's going to pop up somewhere,
Exactly. And the more you practice this, the less reactive you become.
which I imagine is key when it comes to breaking free from those like automatic projection cycles.
Absolutely, because you're building that muscle of awareness.
So what else can we do besides journaling and meditation to like boost that self-awareness?
Well, the sources also really emphasize the importance of feedback.
Oh, feedback.
Yeah.
Oof, that can be a tough one.
It can be hard to hear sometimes, right?
Yeah, but you know, they say that the truth will set you free or something like that.
Something like that.
Hmm.
But it's true, though. Honest feedback is so crucial, especially when it comes from people who really know us well.
That's an important point.
Yeah, it can't just be from anybody, right?
So not just like random internet comments.
Right, exactly. We need to be open to hearing different perspectives, even if they're not what we want to hear.
Oh, for sure.
Because maybe there's a pattern we're completely blind to.
Right. Or like our perception of a situation is just,
Totally skewed.
yeah, skewed.
Or it's just not the whole picture.
Right. And that's tough to hear sometimes.
It is. It can be
Yeah.
really hard.
But it's like that saying, like, you don't know what you don't know.
Exactly.
So that feedback from trusted sources, it can be like,
Eye-opening.
yeah, it can really illuminate those blind spots.
And it can help us grow.
Which, I mean, isn't that the whole point of this?
Well, it's a lifelong journey, right?
Right? Growing and learning and all that good stuff.
Exactly.
This whole conversation is making me think about defense mechanisms in a whole new light.
It's interesting stuff, isn't it?
It is. It's like, on the one hand, we kind of need those things to function.
We do.
Like, can you imagine if we were just raw dogging it all the time
Yeah.
out in the world, just like
Oh my God.
all emotions all the time? We'd be a wreck.
Yeah, exactly. But then on the other hand, like,
There's a dark side.
there is.
Yeah.
Like we were saying with that feedback thing. Sometimes those things, they backfire. Totally, they do. It's like putting a Band-Aid on a broken arm, you know?
Yeah.
Like it might feel better for a minute,
Right.
but you still need to like actually deal with the injury.
So how do we move from those like quick fix Band-Aid solutions to healthier ways of dealing with stuff,
Right.
especially when it comes to something like low self-esteem?
It's about recognizing those like automatic reactions and choosing a different path. And our sources give some really good examples of this.
Okay, like what?
So let's say you're feeling super insecure about something.
Okay.
Instead of like isolating yourself, which is really easy to do.
Oh, yeah. Hide under the covers?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But a healthier approach would be to reach out to somebody who gets you.
It's that whole connection over isolation thing, right?
Totally. Even if it feels a little risky to put yourself out there.
Oh, yeah. It can be scary to be vulnerable.
It can be, but it's better than like stewing in your own juices and letting those insecurities just get bigger.
Totally. And our sources highlight some other really helpful strategies, too.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Like practicing gratitude,
Love that one.
right? Or doing things that boost your confidence, even if it's something small.
Yeah.
And then like setting realistic goals for yourself.
It's all about building yourself up, right?
Yes, instead of tearing yourself down,
Exactly.
which, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. But what about when those like not so healthy coping mechanisms just keep calling your name?
Oh, they do. It's like they have their own siren song.
They do like the procrastination monster
Oh, yes.
or the self-sabotage spiral. Those are my favorites.
Those are fun, aren't
The
they?
worst.
The worst, but it's important to remember they often give you a little blip of relief, even though it's going to make things worse in the long run.
Right. So tempting, though.
Oh, it's so tempting. But our sources, they specifically caution against things like, you know,
Tell me.
using substances to cope
Okay, yeah.
or like totally avoiding things that make you uncomfortable.
Okay, avoidance. I'm very familiar with that one.
The best, and then the one we all love, harsh self-criticism.
Oh my gosh, the worst.
The worst, because it keeps you stuck.
Yes, exactly. It's a cycle.
Totally. And it stops you from really getting to the root of why your self-esteem is hurting in the first place.
And that's where therapy can come in, right?
Exactly. Therapy can be so helpful in those situations.
And speaking of therapy,
Yes.
our sources dive into a couple of specific approaches that I think are really interesting.
Yeah. What are those?
So they talk about CBT and then these mindfulness-based techniques.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So for those of us who haven't spent a lot of time on the therapist's couch,
Right, because it can feel like a whole other language.
it can. How do those approaches actually help with projection specifically?
So with cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT, it's all about like retraining your brain to see things differently.
Okay, so identifying those thought patterns.
Exactly, because those negative thought patterns, they contribute to low self-esteem,
Yeah.
and then they also make that projection so much worse.
Interesting.
So with CBT, you learn how to recognize those kind of distorted thoughts and then replace them with something that's a little more balanced and realistic.
Huh. So it's like you're not necessarily trying to get rid of all your thoughts.
No, because that's impossible.
Right.
But you're learning how to work with them a little bit differently.
So it's like you're becoming more aware of the thoughts, but then you also have this like toolbox of ways to deal with them.
Exactly. You're not just at the mercy of your mind anymore.
I like that.
And then with mindfulness-based approaches, which we talked about a little bit earlier.
Right, with the meditation.
Yeah, exactly. It's all about cultivating that sense of like, just noticing your thoughts and feelings without judgment.
Right.
So that you can actually choose how you want to respond instead of just getting hijacked by your emotions.
Because when we're hijacked by our emotions, that's when the projection comes out to play.
That's usually when it happens, yeah.
This has been so interesting.
It really has.
I feel like I've learned so much.
Me too.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the wild world of psychological projection, what's your biggest takeaway? What should our listeners really hold on to?
I think for me, it's the power of understanding.
Okay.
Because when we really understand projection, both in ourselves and in other people, it just like opens up this whole new level of compassion.
That's such a good point.
We start to see those behaviors, the ones that used to drive us crazy.
Oh, yeah.
We see them through a whole new lens.
And we realize that everybody's fighting their own battles.
Totally, even if we can't see them.
Which is so easy to forget.
It is. It's so easy to judge.
Right.
But when we remember that everyone's dealing with their own insecurities, their own struggles, it just changes everything.
It really does. And it makes you want to be a little kinder, a little more understanding.
Exactly.
Not just to other people, but also to yourself.
Yes, that's so important.
Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this episode.
Sounds good.
Thank you so much for diving deep with us today.
This was fun.
It was for everyone listening. Be sure to check out the show notes for links to all the resources that we mentioned, plus some further reading on psychological projection if you want to geek out even more.
There's always more to learn, right?
Always until next time, keep diving deep, and remember, a little self-awareness goes a long way.